Thank you for your kind introduction as well as putting together that video. I didn't realize that. I thought I would need to say something or so, but that was really good. Thank you so much for doing that. So, can I share my screen now? Is that all right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, only hosts who can share. Okay. Do I need to click something there?
Okay. Let me check.
Oh no, I think it should be okay now. Is
Yeah.
it coming up?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Selamat sore to the participants. I cannot see you, so it's a bit weird now doing presentations over Zoom, but I'll try my best. But like Mally mentioned already, that if you have any questions, it will be good to actually discuss your questions later on. I was told that I actually had only, I was given 30 minutes for the presentations. So
Okay.
that's
Sorry. Maybe
okay.
my mistake. It's okay.
It's all right.
Yeah.
I'll see how it
44
goes.
minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to do this afternoon is I'm going to share with you the experience of basically using video technology to understand facets of teachers' pedagogical practices in science and mathematics lessons in primary school context, in particular looking at, that teaching actions and opportunities and that they notice from their lesson. Okay, so I'll start with the background. So as I think probably most of the participants will be either teachers or pre-service teachers, I'm assuming. So we all understand that classrooms are multi-dimensional, and when we are teaching, obviously, although we plan our lessons and we spend a lot of time perhaps in planning our lessons in quite a detail, documented maybe in a detailed lesson plan, but we realize always that there are unpredictable moments, or some things that we find surprising during the lesson. So that is very well known and has been discussed, I think, in many studies. So that highlights actually the importance for us as a teachers to be able to respond in the moment and make decisions on the run or on the fly in classrooms, and we'll be able, it's critical because we want to be able to build on students' ideas and then, adapted our lessons to, when we face contingency, we need to be able to adapt our lessons to meet the students' learning needs and be able to extend their learning. Oh, sorry, I went the other way around. Okay, so these slides talk about teachers' understanding and teaching of mathematical and scientific reasoning. And there's a quote from Hattie about the fact that actually teachers account for about 30% of the variance in students' learning outcomes. So it is quite a critical role that we play as a teacher. In this particular presentation, I would like to really visit the analysis that I have done in terms of the data that we've collected from this particular project by focusing or looking at the particular aspect, which is looking at the teacher's knowledge of how to respond in the moment, or what is known as contingency. This is the term that Roland and his colleagues introduced, and I think Melly will be very, very aware of this because she used it in her PhD study. So according to Roland, as teachers, we face contingency, and there are various factors that triggers contingency, but there are also different ways that teachers tend to respond to contingency in the classroom. So the first response is perhaps to ignore or to dismiss if we don't know what to do, or if you think that, oh, I don't really know what to do, I don't want to respond, and then just ignore it. The second response is to acknowledge, but then continue the lesson maybe and for various reasons that teachers make those two decisions. Then the third option is to actually extend the lesson, or extend and make connections between the contingent moments that maybe the teacher saw that the student responded incorrectly, and then he wanted to use that moment as an opportunity to actually make connection or probe more further into students' thinking, for example. And that's the last point. So there are various options or various possible responses that a teacher will make when they are faced with contingencies or contingent moments. Oops, don't know why I keep going back to this one. Sorry about that. So I'm connecting it to the research that my colleagues at Deakin University and I did a couple years ago. So we're focusing on trying to understand teacher noticing, primary teachers especially noticing, and teacher noticing has been discussed a lot in the literature. Actually, it's one of the growing field of research, and it's considered as a hallmark of teacher expertise. So when teacher, when you talk about experienced teacher and beginning teachers, you can distinguish the different quality of their noticing, for instance. So professional noticing here, I quoted the work of Jacobs. So there are other definitions of teacher noticing. So according to Jacobs and colleagues, they look at three different aspects of professional noticing. The first part is attending to student strategies. The second element or component is interpreting students' understanding or children's understanding. And the third one is deciding how to respond on the basis of their understanding of students' thinking or students' learning. So, so often to facilitate or to enhance teacher noticing, there has been a lot of study that use video as a way to stimulate or develop further teacher professional noticing. So this is according to Tripp and Reach. So according to this researcher, they talk about the potential or affordances of video reflection to support teachers' learning. So I think the first point that they talk about is by looking or reflecting on the video of their teaching, teachers are able to identify gaps between their beliefs about good teaching and their actual teaching practice, because we know sometimes that the belief doesn't necessarily correspond or align very closely to the actual or the enacted teaching. So that will be one of the potential contribution of, when we reflect on the video, we will be able to look at the gaps if there is any sort of discrepancy between the belief and the enacted teaching practice. Video reflection also allow teachers to articulate their tacit assumptions and purposes about teaching and learning. So in our study, for example, during the interview, teacher will talk about their beliefs about all their assumptions about students, particular students, and their knowledge as well about that particular students. And they will talk about, oh, I was quite surprised that in this lesson, this student is quite engaged. That was quite different, for instance. So that's sort of like give them opportunities to be able to articulate their assumptions. Also, because it's usually when we use video, we allow teachers to actually look at the video and then reflect on what happened during the teaching, and that allows them to actually notice things that they might already forget, because maybe the lesson was some time ago. Allows teachers to also look at different aspects of the classroom teaching and assess the strengths and weaknesses of their teaching. Obviously, it doesn't tell video as a medium or as a catalyst doesn't capture the whole thing, and something that we don't capture in the video also tells something about the teaching as well. So a lot of studies have looked at the knowledge underlying professional noticing. So there are a few points of consensus, although there are some still unresolved sort of like areas. So the first point is teachers do notice some things in the classroom while they might overlook other things. So, you know, that is quite common, like, you know, you always probably foreground something and then some other things were noticed, but probably it was noticed in the background more. And it is contextual and interdependent, so really depends on the classroom context, you know, the lesson on the day and other factors. So this one, the two factors that have been identified by Sharon and Russ as two key processes in teachers' professional noticing are the selective attention and knowledge-based reasoning. Okay, and Shiner actually quite recently, in 2016, talked about the fact that, you know, while there's a lot of studies looking at teacher professional noticing and various factors that influence teacher noticing, the issue remains the relationship between the various activities is still not obvious. So that's one area for further research. So for this particular project, we actually use variation theory. Many of you probably are aware of variation theory by Ferenc Martin and colleagues. So according to variation theory, it really foregrounds critical accounts for variation theory in people's learning, and, you know, look at the simultaneous discernment of different aspects involved and the level of understanding. Okay, so for us teachers, you know, when we prepare our lessons, for example, in either mathematics or in science or in different areas, subject disciplines, we need to consider, for instance, the variations of the learning tasks, the choice of tasks, learning tasks, and the choice of examples and the choice of representations. And obviously that was all informed by our knowledge of students, our knowledge of curriculums, our knowledge of the disciplines, like, and of course, our understanding of students' learning, where they are at and where they are going. So in the presentation today, so I drew on actually the published work. So I don't know whether you're aware of these two publications, but those are the two publications arising from the project on teacher noticing that we've done. We started, I think, 2016 and 2017 with two schools, primary schools, in one in Melbourne and one in Geelong. So it's a small scale study. I think I did talk about this before. So yeah, I think the potential of or the affordances of video to investigate and enhance teacher professional noticing. So I won't repeat that again. So let's have a look at the video research and what we've learned so far in terms of the methodological uncertainties, as well as some of the issues related to ethical considerations. So I think the two researchers cited there actually highlighted that there is a significant and persistent gap between the promise offered by video technology and the reality of employing digital video in research. So one of the ethical aspect, I suppose, with using video in classroom studies is the level of intrusions that is caused by having an external video or external maybe researchers or technician, videographers in the classroom to record the classroom, and that often cause a certain level of intrusion, or, you know, the teacher often commented that, oh, my student today sort of like were very quiet. That was very, you know, unusual. They're usually very, very loud or very active, etc. So they talk about the impact of the video on the, perhaps the changing the nature of interactions among students and among student and teachers. But we also learn, like, you know, often after a few maybe video recorded lessons, then children often you know, sort of like get used to the presence of video quite quickly. And that's why I think when students are doing their research in the classroom, they use video in trying to capture the data. We always recommend them to maybe do a few recordings prior to the start of the data collection, to just make sure that the students are used to the presence of video and the presence of the researchers, okay, to minimize that impact of the intrusion to the quality of the data collections. The other issues would be the tensions between control and flexibility, like, you know, how much control do you give to the teachers in terms of recording, and also how much flexibility you will allow the teachers to be able to do. So in our study, for instance, we initially, to minimize the intrusion of the videographer or us as researchers, we make a decision not to be in the classroom and then give the video to the teachers and allow them to actually capture the data themselves. But obviously, we've learned the lesson after the data collection that actually created an extra level of complexity for teachers, because they have to learn how to, you know, navigate the technical issues with the videoing. So that was also not very good in terms of creating extra burden for teachers in the data collection. Obviously, with the video, any video kind of like settings, video classroom settings, I think you need to have actually a certain level of mutual trust, and teachers need to understand what is the benefit of doing that research for themselves as well, and how can that process actually empower and enable teacher agency, you know, by getting involved in the study. So there are different issues that are highlighted in some of the studies, earlier studies. For example, the distinction between professional vision in action and professional vision after viewing, because we noticed that when we look at the reflection that the teacher completed or after the lesson, and then when they went back after viewing the video and then, you know, had more time to reflect on it, there are differences in terms of the level of reflection. There's also differences when you get teachers to reflect individually on their own lesson or their peers' lesson, and when you get them to actually have a collaborative discussion with their colleagues and looking at the same video together. So there's that differences as well, obviously affected by the dynamics of the conversations among the peers as well. There is also distinctions between, you know, whether or not you as a researcher, we as a researcher selected the clips for to facilitate the stimulated reflection, for example, or you get the teachers to actually select the clips and discuss their reflection. So there are different approaches, I think, with that. There are 3 research questions in our main studies, but today I'm just focusing or looking at the 2 questions. So the first one is, what do primary school teachers notice as salient in a mathematics or a science lesson? And what is the role of the video in researching teacher noticing? So the research design involved obviously video filming. As I mentioned earlier, this is done by the teacher themselves. So they are using the GoPro camera, which I'm going to show in the next slide. In terms of the video viewing, we have different two different levels. So first we got teachers to actually view their own lesson individually and view their peers' lesson individually, and then record those like salient moments that they identify and identify the time as well and why they selected those moments as salient or important. And then we have collaborative viewing, or like maybe you can call it focus group discussion, where you actually discuss with teachers, you know, so out of their selected salient moments, we get them to pick maybe three most of the most salient moments and discuss with their peers. So that's the collaborative viewing. And then we use studio code analysis to look at the salient moments, compare and contrast. That's where we use the variation theory to actually come up with a thematic analysis based on those different data. So this is the video technology that we use. So you use the GoPro camera either on the teacher's head. So I'm planning to show a brief video where you probably get to see the teachers wearing the GoPro on her head. And then we also have an iPad with this mounted on a swivel robotic at the back, usually at the back of the classroom, so that will capture the whole class view of the interaction, the classroom or the lesson. So we kind of like look at the technological resources here to mediate the human activity, and it's important because it shapes the processes of knowledge construction and conceptualizations. So the reflection sheet or recording sheet, this is kind of like one of the example. It's handwritten, which is a bit hard to see, maybe hard to read. But basically in their individual reflection, we ask teachers to identify the time in the video recording that they mark as salient or important moments. And then they have a brief description of the moment, and then explain the reason why they choose that as a salient moment. So I think I already mentioned before that the research design consideration for our study is to minimize the intrusion to the classroom. So by purposefully having the researchers absent from the video data collection. So we get teachers to self-capture videos, and then we hope that actually empower teacher participants. And as I mentioned before, there are issues as well we learn from that. So the teacher participants, there are two teachers from one primary school in regional Victoria. So 1 year 1 and 2 teacher, and then 1 year 5 and 6 teachers. So this is a composite classroom, the two composite classrooms. The 3 teachers from one primary school in metropolitan Melbourne. So 2 year 5, 6 teachers. So they are teaching maths and other subjects except for science, and then we have 1 science specialist. So for the purpose of today's presentation, I'm basically focusing on 1 teacher from the regional Victoria, and then the data from 1 of the science specialists because of the limited time. So let me share with you some of the key findings. So from the individual reflection, like I mentioned earlier, so I'm going to focus on identifying or looking at the different aspects related to the contingency. So in looking at the analysis of the individual reflection, these are the 3 kind of like areas that the teacher identify as salient. So responding to contingency, they identify missed opportunities when they look at their video or their peers video, and student reasonings about the tasks, and then that can be expected or unexpected. So let's start by looking at Melinda's lesson. This is a maths lesson on adding fractions, so for year 5, 6 classroom. So here's the talk actually about responding to contingency. I'm going to try to show the video. It's only going to be very brief. So I actually have it open. Bear with me for 1 second. And if you can let me know, Melly, perhaps if the audio is coming out as well. So I think I need to stop sharing the slide and then try to share the video. That one. I think hopefully the sound is all right. So I'm just going to start from this and then goes for maybe 30 seconds. So it's going to be just zooming in at the particular moment just before the teacher had that conversation with students. Is that okay, the sound?
No
sound?
No sound. I cannot hear the sound.
Okay. Can you hear it?
No.
Sorry. So the video, so you cannot hear the sound, is that right?
Yeah, no.
Okay, that's all. Yeah. Sorry about that, but that's all right. I'll just explain what happened. I'm just going back to this. So I'll stop sharing and then I'll share the slides again. So I can talk about that at the moment. So I go back. Oh no, that one. Sorry, wrong. Too many things open. Bear with me for 1 second. I think this one. Share. Okay, so basically the video was very brief. What the teacher, what I just showed you was that the moment where the teacher actually, when she roamed in the classroom, you can see that she was actually taking notes of the different responses from students. That's one of the kind of like the things that they did. They call it cross-check. So they recorded their observation of the different responses from different students. And she noticed that the student that she approached actually made a mistake. So that was a contingent moment for her. So, and in her reflection sheet, she actually said that moment was important because initially she was going to tell the students, and you could hear, I mean, if you heard the noise, the voice, actually she was almost going to tell the students that she was incorrect, but then she stopped herself, and then she actually questioned the students. So she said that it allowed me to actually use my questioning technique to encourage the student to check her own work. So, and she was very honest about the fact that she was almost jumping to, you know, tell the students, you see what you've done there, but you know, you see, stop herself. So I think that was a contingency moment that she actually picked up as a salient moment in her reflection as well. So that was a very interesting and important moment. And this is, we are going to look at the salient points in the science lesson. Melly, let me know in terms of time if I'm running out of time or something. So I think this particular episode that the teacher identified as important, she was looking at the students' understanding or prior knowledge, and he realized that actually the student's background knowledge was not enough. So he decided to actually give them another stimulus. So the teacher actually adjusted his lesson by realizing that, you know, the students needed a little bit more support. And another teacher who actually observed the video or look at this video of the science lesson also commented and identified this moment as a salient moment, and C, pick up the fact that the teacher used a visual simulation and the importance of that to support students who are visual learners, for instance. This science specialist actually have a lot of contingent moments in his lesson. So he also had another moment, another point in the lesson where he had to change his lesson or modify his lesson on the run because he was running out of paper towel, and he did this experiment, you know, and getting students to measure the amount of water that was absorbed in the different types of cloths. But because he had 2 other lessons prior to the video recorded lesson, he was running out of the paper towel, and he picked up something from the kitchen, the staff kitchen area, and he realized that actually that was a different kind of paper towel. It didn't have the same level of absorption. So instead of absorbing the water, it was kind of like leaking. The water was leaking. So, and he said like practically that was ruining the whole experiment, the science experiment. So he was saying that, oh, that was really, he had to modify the lesson on the run. And then the fact that, you know, flexibility is very important. So, and he also commented, I think it's partly also because of the nature of science and science experiment, that he really had to quite often leave out several steps. So for example, he gave another example where he had to adjust, for instance, a lesson on a heat transfer because there was no sun outside. So, you know, that kind of experiment really dependent on the temperature, outside temperature and everything. So there's always a lot of contingent moments, I think, that even I think in the math lessons as well. So responding to unexpected students' ideas or maybe incorrect responses that we didn't anticipate. So that created a lot of contingency. So we also talk about missed opportunities, and what the teacher identified as one of the missed opportunities came when he jumped in too quickly to help a student, and that kind of like ruined sort of the opportunity for the students to develop more independence and problem solving, which is, I think, a very good point that he raised. So the teacher also talked about the distinction between salient moments or deliberate moments, because one of the teacher, you know, didn't notice what is the salient moment according to her colleague, and then Melinda was talking about the fact that, you know, there's a difference between salient moments and deliberate moments. And in the lesson, often teachers make a lot of decisions and, you know, have deliberate actions, but they might not consider everything as salient or important. So I think the key findings in terms of collaborative discussions, we see that there are different frames that the teacher used in noticing salient moments or important moments. Obviously, it is influenced by their individual knowledge, beliefs, and experiences, and the contextual resources and perspectives as well. And I think the video, we found that actually, and the teacher reflections with colleagues and discussion actually serve as a productive stimulus to harness teacher noticing. So this is coming from the interview with the 2 teachers. So I know it's a bit small, so hopefully, I think in the slides, I hope that it's bigger enough. So Melinda, for instance, talk about the fact that for her, viewing the whole class footage, so the iPad, like the footage from the iPad, for her that was more beneficial than looking at the GoPro, because she said that she knew what was, you know, because she kind of like the GoPro capture basically what she was looking at, whereas the iPad actually captured what she didn't probably see. So that was more useful for her. For Gary, I think so he was talking about the fact that, yeah, I mean, he had to leave out some part of the lesson, and he also noticed the missed opportunities with the fact that he was running out of time and didn't get to get students to write their observation, for example. So this is the role of looking at the role of the video in exploring teachers' professional noticing. We look at the analogy between human eyes and camera lenses, and we also realize that there are limitations with video. So video often doesn't capture. It's not often. It doesn't capture teachers' peripheral vision. So teachers often are able to capture what happened in the surrounding, not only what they see in front of them, but often they also talk about, oh, I hear something in the background, and that they can pay attention to that. Whereas I think video doesn't have that. Camera lenses only look at one way and capture certain angles. So there are that limitations when you compare I think the capacity of video and the human eyes. I think there are definitely different affordances and constraints. So it does serve multiple roles. So it can capture the interactions. It can support the stimulated recall and stimulate reflection. We see it both as a process and a product, and we agree with those two researchers there. We argue that it's not a neutral medium, so you still have to make sense and interpret what takes place in the social situation. When we as researchers look at the video and teachers as practitioners look at the video, we probably don't always see the same thing, you see. So that actually shows that it's not a neutral medium, or probably identify different things as salient as well. So implications for future research, there are still, I think, challenges in teasing out the in-the-moment noticing in the classroom from noticing as learning, so as a process like that. There are also theoretical challenges, like to identify or to distinguish which profession noticing is done subconsciously, and then also, I think some teachers are more articulate than other teachers. So, maybe they actually, it's hard, it's similar to PC case studies, for example. Often we talk about the fact that it is quite complex because PCK is tacit, and, often teachers' knowledge is tacit. So sometimes it's quite hard to unpack that. So of course we also uncover the technological challenges to capture teacher noticing in the moment. So thank you. I hope I don't run out of time and I leave out enough time for discussion and questions and answers, because I'm looking forward to hearing from the participants and their experiences as well. So over to you, Melly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bu Wanty, for your wonderful presentation about using video reflection to improve teaching. Okay, we have time for question and answer. Please write your question in the Q&A box. Don't forget to write your name and your institution. Okay, we have one question here, Bu Wanty. This is from Ibu Rahma Johar from Unsiah Aceh. She has 3 questions. Question 1, I want to know more about the meaning of the sentence, quote, teacher account for about 30% of the variance in students' learning.
Okay.
The second question is, you asked teacher to watch her own video. How long did they watch their own video for one lesson? Where did they watch the video? In the same room with the researcher's room or different room? And question 3 is, the camera is mounted on the head of the teacher. Was it a good idea? It was a good idea. I love it. It's not a question. It's a comment from Ibu Rahma.
Okay.
So 2 questions.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Hello, Bu Rahma. Selamat sore. Thank you for the questions. That was great. So, the first quote was from John Hattie. So, John Hattie, as you know, he's an expert in assessment, and he was actually he did a meta-analysis of, um, what are the factors that in the teachers practice or whatever that account for the variance that are impactful in students learning, basically that make a difference in student learning outcomes. And in his study he reported that actually teachers contributed, or actually played 30%, or create how should I say, teacher's role actually account for 30% the difference in the students' learning. So it's quite significant in terms of impact of teachers on students' learning outcomes. So that's to highlight that teachers actually played a significant role. So teachers' knowledge, teachers' practice, teachers' practice. I think that is the critical thing. So I think why it's important in terms of the teacher noticing, because I think what teachers notice and how they responded to students' thinking, especially in extending is very powerful in extending students' learning. So if they notice something like the contingency, for example, in Melinda's lesson, and she decided not to do anything, that would be very different situation, and that will impact on the students learning differently if, for example, the teacher decided to ignore the contingent moment that came up in that lesson, for instance. I hope that explained that. The second question is about, can you remind me again, Mali?
Yeah, it's about when the teacher watched their video,
Oh, yeah,
how long did it
yeah,
take for
yeah.
them to watch one lesson, and where did they watch it?
Yeah. So, so we actually learned that there are differences in the, that's again in the individual factors. But I think all the teachers actually were supposed to watch their own lesson. So their own lesson is probably around 50 minutes, like, to 40 to 50 minutes, I think, lesson. So the whole lesson from the beginning until the end. And then they also watch their colleagues' lesson, their peers' lesson. So in Geelong, there are two teachers. So she watched her own maths lesson and her science lesson, because they're generalist teachers, so they have to teach maths and science. So, and she also watched her colleagues' lesson in maths and science. So basically she has 4 lessons to watch, which is quite a lot maybe. And in the Melbourne school, because the 2 teachers didn't teach science, and Gary was the science specialist, so the 2 teachers have to watch Gary's lesson and one of the other maths lesson, and Gary has to watch the other 2 teachers' lesson and his own lesson. They watch it in their own time, so we didn't watch it together. So the researcher was not together with the teachers when they watched those videos, so because they have the recording reflection sheet, and then we just asked them to actually fill them up and then discuss and pick some of those moments later on. What we realized, for example, in one of the schools, the teachers didn't have time to actually watch the science lesson, for example. So during the post-lesson discussion, we have to watch it together, and then we discuss it with them. I mean, like, that happened because I guess teachers are very busy. They were very busy. They didn't have time, and yeah, we realized that as well. So as one of the probably the limitation. With the comment on the use of the GoPro on the teacher's head, I think there are pros and cons, I suppose. The good thing is you can actually see what the teachers are looking at, but the problem is when you watch it back, it's actually quite challenging, because when the teachers move their head, it gets very difficult to watch actually.
Mm-hmm.
And they also said the same thing, like, you know, it makes you dizzy because it keeps moving.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the other another school, I think the teacher have the yeah, that's the science teacher actually wore it on the chest, like instead of the head. So he actually put it on the chest because you can actually put it there. Yeah, but I didn't. I think if you can see the picture there, that you see that he didn't wear the GoPro camera on the head. Yeah, so there are the pros and cons, I suppose. Like, thank you for the question. I hope I did answer those questions.
Yeah, thank you, Bu. I have two more questions.
Okay.
These questions are similar. It's about the authenticity of the using video in the classroom. It's from Bapak Radiosman from Universitas Mataram.
Mm-hmm.
He said that most students I have taught, they will study more regularly if there's camera in the classroom.
Ah,
How does the teacher manage the class or convince students to study normally as if there's no camera in the classroom? So
yeah.
so it really can capture the strength and weakness in the teaching. And the next question is from Puspita Sari from UNJ. She sent you
Yeah.
her regard. Bu.
Thank you.
She said, I wonder whether the use of GoPro on teachers' head will affect students' responses in the classroom,
Mm.
especially regarding the natural setting of qualitative research.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
good questions. Thank you
Mm.
so much. So, yeah, I think the teachers did comment on the fact that, like, one of the teacher in Geelong especially, the year 1 and 2 teachers, she commented on the fact that in one of her science lesson, the students did seem a bit quiet compared to their regular sort of their regular self, I suppose. So we acknowledge the fact that it did impact on the perhaps the more naturalistic setting of how the teacher and student interacted. Although in the reflection, the teacher also said, the other teacher from another school commented on the fact that, well, perhaps if we actually use it a lot more in our day-to-day like lessons beforehand, like if the students got used to it, then probably the impact was not as noticeable, like I mentioned earlier. So you know, perhaps it was a matter of you know, allowing enough time for students to get used to that, and the fact that because I think some of the students actually, in fact, some of the students, the science teacher noticed that the students some of the students tend to be more active because they saw
Mm.
the camera and they wanted to be seen in the camera. So you
Okay.
have two different type of sort of like different interactions, I
Mm.
suppose.
Mm.
You know, those who wanted to be seen as more active or more engaged, and or maybe see it more as a motivating factors, and those who didn't feel confident or maybe comfortable in being seen or being, you know, seen as talking in the, but I think, like, you know, yeah, it takes time and it does impact on the naturalistic setting. I guess the use of GoPro, it can be seen as positive but also negative. Well, when we decided to use the GoPro, we thought that because we wanted to see where the teachers directed their attention and what they're looking at. So that's why we decided to actually have that camera mounted on the teachers using the GoPro. And, like, you know,
Mm.
it probably is more common in sports, or when you see the police are wearing that in their body camera. But that's the idea, is to be able to see where the teacher is looking in the classroom. So trying to capture where the eyes of the teacher using the camera, but obviously that there are that limitations that people already pointed out that we realize as well.
Okay. Thank you so much, Bu Wanty.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, our time is almost up. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, all participants, for joining us and for all of your questions. I hope today's session can bring you, give you insights into teacher reflection if I may give a short conclusion, using a video reflection could really help teachers to identify salient moment, like the respond to contingency, and then identifying missing opportunities. And when they identify their own teaching practice, hopefully it will improve their teaching practice in the future. Thank you so much, Bu Wanty, for
Thank you.
today.